Cops, who's the smartest criminal you ever met? I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scenes. There was this one case that stuck with me. A guy was using a pretty clever trick. He'd attach a GPS tracker to the bottom of people's cars, targeting those with houses he wanted to rob. The idea was simple. He'd track their movements to figure out when they'd be gone. Once he knew they were out, he'd go in and take whatever he wanted. He'd always make sure to leave before they returned, timing it so he wouldn't get caught. It was a smart method, no rushing, no mistakes. He just followed them closely, waited for the right moment, and took what he needed without ever drawing attention. It was methodical, and it worked for him. Story 2. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release him to police once he was cleared. Once in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that made the person attending the desk leave the file cabinet. He would crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release papers, and literally eat them. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. What do you think, was the man manipulating the system, or was the system setting him up for success? Story 3. I remember an officer telling me about a breaking and entering alarm that he and his team responded to one night. There was no one around to report it, so it was likely the security monitoring company that called it in. When the officers arrived, everything appeared calm, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry. The place looked quiet. When they went inside they found a guy who claimed to be an employee. He explained that he had been working late and must have accidentally triggered the alarm while moving around. He seemed nervous, but he almost convinced them. That was, until they asked him the name of the company he worked for. The officers immediately knew he was lying when he answered. It was a small detail, but it was enough to raise suspicion. So they decided to search the man and ended up finding a lockpick in his pocket. Needless to say, he was not an employee and was carted off to jail on the spot. I wonder how many times he had done this before he got caught. It must have been a lot if he just got so used to going into random back doors without bothering to check the name of the place first. Story 4. This guy wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind, but here's how it went down. He set his sights on robbing a high-end jewelry store on our city's main street. When he discovered that an empty flat next door was available, he rented it under a fake alias. For 2 weeks, he stayed hidden in the apartment, and every few nights, sometimes even back-to-back, he'd trigger the store's alarm, causing a headache for the police. Eventually, the jeweler grew frustrated and decided to disable the alarm, and the police left. The moment they were gone, he tore down the wall and made his move, robbing the store and making his escape, without anyone noticing. Hours passed before the jeweler returned in the morning to discover what had happened. The guy made off with, somewhere in between $300,000 to $500,000 worth of jewelry. And as far as I know was never caught. I know OP said this guy wasn't a mastermind, but escaping with $500,000 never to be caught doesn't exactly seem very small-minded if you ask me. What do you think, was he a mastermind, or was he just lucky? Let me know what you think in the comments. Story 5. This happened around the time iPhones had just been released, hard to get and worth a small fortune on the streets. I was out patrolling one night, just finished up grabbing some dinner walking back to my car when this guy comes bursting out of this door. Turns out, he was a French thief, recently out of prison. He'd found this apartment building with the perfect emergency exit to make quick getaways. He went back and turned this emergency exit into a fake apartment, complete with a new lock, a fake number, and even a welcome mat. He'd been setting up sales for iPhones which he never really had. Luring people in with the promise of a good deal. Once inside, he'd tell them to wait while he counted the money, then vanish with their cash. That night, I was just in the right place at the right time. He ran right out and basically fell right into my lap. The guy buying the phone wasn't too far behind. He got his money back. And our thief there got a free ride back to jail. Story 6. I remember this time we caught this person who was pulling a shoplifting scam at a large, popular US retail store. They'd walk in with a cheap nylon product in hand and casually make their way to the electronics department. There, they'd grab an expensive item, something like a high-end gadget or electronics box, and take it to customer service. They'd place a sticker on the big box, asking if they could return it without a receipt. The customer service representative, without hesitation, told them that a return would only be possible with the original receipt. So, they would just walk out with their new product in hand, giving the doorman a thumbs up on the way out. They got away with this for a while until they got too comfortable and returned to the same store a third time. The only reason we caught them was because they got too bold and hit the same place a third time. We just so happened to be close enough to catch them in the parking lot. Story 7. This one night, we get a call probably around 3 a.m. that the local Best Buy just had an alarm go off. Everything looked good out front, until we made our way around back to find a sledgehammer laying on a pile of brick. Turns out this guy used a sledgehammer to smash his way through the wall at the Best Buy. It probably took him a good 45 minutes to do. When the hole was eventually big enough, he slipped through and stole a bunch of phones and cameras. He was smart enough to wear gloves and a face mask and didn't touch anything unnecessary. The alarms didn't go off until he exited through the back door, giving him a 5-minute head start. We never did catch the guy. I was truly impressed. I'd never seen a robbery so methodically planned before, well besides all the hard work smashing a wall with a sledgehammer I guess. Story 8. My favorite story was about a guy who stole a post office mailbox off the street, repainted it, and placed it next to the night deposit box at a bank. He then hung an out-of-order sign on the deposit box. Over the next few days, local businesses came by and dropped off their deposits in the mailbox, thinking it was a temporary solution. After a few days, a bank employee grew suspicious when they noticed the mailbox seemed too new and out of place, especially compared to the old, worn-out deposit box next to it. Curious, the employee decided to check the mailbox, and when they opened it, they found it wasn't even bolted down properly. Realizing something was off, they called us. We sat across the street in an unmarked vehicle that night waiting for the guy. When he showed up, we raced over and he was arrested before he could make off with much more. It was a clever, yet short-lived, scheme. Story 9. One guy had a brilliant scam where he'd print fake barcodes at home, then bring them into Home Depot and stick them on merchandise that was priced around $100. When these items were scanned at the checkout, the system would register them at just around $10. He'd then buy the items at the lower price and resell them on eBay for a hefty profit. The scheme worked for a while, and they were making good money off the difference. However, things took a turn when the guy who was printing the barcodes decided to cut out his partner from the operation. Without warning, he took all the profits for himself. The second guy, who was now left out, got frustrated and decided to take matters into his own hands. He stole some of the barcodes, went back to Home Depot, and stuck them on more merchandise. But this time, he went a step further. He paid for the items himself. Afterward, feeling betrayed, he went straight to the authorities and ratted out his former partner. The police were able to trace the operation back to the first guy, and both were eventually caught. It was a well-planned hustle that ended when greed and betrayal turned one partner against the other. Story 10. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, and literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves, concerts, and keggers to sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended, wrote the usual "I was young and dumb" sob story, and got put on probation. By the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made about $150,000 in return for $8,000 in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. And as far as I know, he was never caught. If you like my content, please let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below of what you thought.